Yo, my peoples, what's up? Welcome back to Shelf Stories, the channel that tells tales from games, books, and life. And also, welcome to the One Stop Co-op Shop podcast. I am your host, Jason. Thank you so much for stopping by for this special treat of a conversation. You don't often get genuine disagreement, civil disagreement in, it's kind of a brotherly feeling on the interwebs, but we're going to try our best here. It's very exciting for me. So, as everybody knows who listens to my, content, whether it's on the video show or the podcast, I have some things to say about Eurogames. I have some things to say about the way Eurogames treat history in particular. But that doesn't mean that I hold anything personal towards game makers. It doesn't mean I can't, speak and learn. But I'm in the game a couple of years. I'm talking to designers who have been in the game 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So I'm in a learning mode as well when it comes to this stuff. So I'm excited to have a conversation. So I've had a couple of online conversations with this man. He is the designer of many of your favorite games. You may know Citadels more than any. Also, the underrated Raptor. I will talk about Raptor in just a second, but I think that game is outstanding. And a number of them, Dragon's Gold, and a couple of other games. So he is a Spiel des Jahres nominee, and he has been in the game for a very, very long time. He is Bruno Faidutti. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Jason, I'm thrilled to be here. I think we have lots of things to discuss because I'm also interested in trying to understand how games, and especially Euro games, the ones I am making, deal with history. But I would say that my point of view is maybe a bit different from what you just said, in that it says that I have issues with what we are doing. It's more that I think I'm interested in understanding why we are doing it.
Okay.
I don't think games are that important. It's for me, it's a bit like music, like language. It's things which are, especially like language, it's things that it's probably less important than we think. But what is important is understanding what we are doing.
And also understanding how the other person receives the message. So it's like we can have a game and one person has one reaction, another person has another reaction, and it's worth understanding, where the other person's coming from. Because the last thing we want to do is we want to say, well, you're wrong and you're bad. We don't want. I don't want to do. I do not want to do that. That's not what I want to do. So yeah, we can totally get into it. But first of all, tell the peoples a little bit about yourself and your background. Bruno Faidutti is not a name that comes up in our circles. I do cooperative games, and that's not where you're famous for. At least you're more in the social end of things in terms of the games we would really know. But tell the peoples a little bit about your background and some of the things that you've done. I mentioned a couple of games, but you could tell the peoples a bit more.
Okay, so I'm not only a game designer, I'm still a teacher. I'm teaching sociology and economics in high school. I also have a PhD in history, but it deals with, say, not very problematic issues, which is because it's mostly, it's discussion about the existence of the unicorn in the late Middle Ages and European Renaissance. But I've recently written a big book about unicorns in which I deal with relations between the stories that were told in Europe and in the rest of the world, especially in the Arab world, because it's lots of interesting mix. So I'd say half of my working life is teaching, half is designing games. I try to make games that you cannot play with a computer, because I think, computers are better for lots of things. So if we want still to do something as human, we have to focus on what computers can't do. And that's what I try to do with my games which are fun, which engage people in fun ways, in social ways, and well, I think that's it. And yes, I have about 100 games, and last published one, which I think is not talked a lot about, is the Trollfest, which I like a lot. So, well.
Okay. So actually, speaking of that, so I'm a psychotherapist. So I have people who come to me, and they're my clients, and they're suffering from some kind of mental distress, and I especially you mentioned high school. I deal with high school kids, high school young adult kids, people who are struggling with depression, loneliness. I don't know, just like all sorts of stuff. And I have a very small suite of games that I use in therapy with kids that I feel like awaken something and challenge something in them. So like a game like Star Realms is good because they can have their personal hand of cards, and it's a very simple game. We go back and forth. Raptor is on that list. Raptor was a co-design with, we call it the Brunos, right? Bruno Cathala. This game, it's if I can get this game, in print expanded, I'm gonna sing this thing for the rooftop because I think it's outstanding. Because it's a 2-player game, and it's perfect. It's short, and it's perfect for the therapy setting. Because it's very like read your opponents. One player is the Raptors, another player is the scientist, and the Raptors are trying to either escape from the scientists or eat them, and the scientists are trying to capture the Raptors. So then it's back and forth, right? And
we will probably talk about borderizing games. And in Raptor, okay, we say they are scientists, but it's obvious that they are just hunters.
Okay. Well, actually, it's
written scientists in the rules. We're
talking about. Okay, good. This is the subject of the conversation. We're talking about what games say and how games say it and how people receive it, because Americans can tend to receive games differently than other cultures, especially in Europe. So, like, that's what we're talking about, and that's where our conversation started. So we can start there with Raptor. So yes, the rule book. So okay, I just described this game. The rule book says scientists. The rule book is trying to tell you with its what I call global narrative that this is for science. So like you don't have to feel bad about capturing these little babies because they're gonna go to a lab and you're gonna experiment on them. But the game doesn't tell you that. The game only gives you that as a narrative. On the board, the little pieces, all little pieces have tranquilizer guns. There's nobody with a sign. There's nobody with a little magnifying glass. There's nobody with slides. It's just a bunch of guys with guns. And so what Bruno has, the magic, again, the magic of board games, what they've done is they've put the player, and I when I do therapy, usually the players pick the hunters because I called them scientists, which makes them feel good. I'm doing a bad thing, but I'm doing it for science. And so so talk a little bit about that before we get into the main topic. I'm guessing that was intentional, right? I mean, how do you find that, and how do you react to that?
When we designed the game for us, they were hunters, it's obvious. And then we say, okay, it's not a nice story. And I don't remember if it was our idea or the publisher's idea to change them into scientists, but maybe we even did it. But, we did it in part because we knew it was necessary if we really want to sell the game. But it was also intended as a kind of joke because it's so obvious when playing that they are just hunters.
It's funny though, like, because okay, so we know Jurassic World and Jurassic Park, and we know that.
Actually, I've never seen any of these movies.
Okay. So we know Jurassic Park. So what we associated in American concept, because it's such a popular movie here, like, so we're used to seeing the hunters go out and capture the animals, and the hunters are the scientists in the movie. The scientists are the action heroes that are wielding the weapons and everything, and then it's the same thing. So like that's how I pitch the game. It's like, okay, hey, you want to play a quick 2-player Jurassic Park? And oh yeah, sure. So we're able to make that immediate association, and it's so funny to hear you say like, it's all in our heads, and it's all in our associations. That the way we're doing that's fascinating. I could tell you're massively entertained by that. That's great. Okay, so let's talk about the project that initiated this conversation. It is not a secret at this point that I was the cultural consultant that was responsible for the retheme of Puerto Rico. And people who've listened to this podcast are probably a little bit tired of the intro, because I got to read it every single time, because I don't want to take for granted that people know. So yeah, I'm the person that did that. I was the consultant, and I work with the company. I should say that, because the company was great. The company was outstanding. And I'm not going to mention anything about the company. I'm not going to mention anything about the actual process, because we still have some reveals to do. We've only revealed the cover and a few details. There's a lot more reveals to come as I record this. But I think just from whatever has been released so far, there's been a lot of conversation. A lot. I don't know. Like, I mean, I guess I could say it from my perspective, but I think it will be talking from your perspective, so how you reacted to the project and the conversation. Let me invite you to share your thoughts, and then we can start from there.
Okay, so my thoughts are probably influenced by the fact that I wrote a very long article about these colonial terms in board games, something like 10 years ago, and which was maybe one of the things that started the discussion on these terms, I think, because at the moment it was a bit the elephant in the room, and now everybody is talking about it.
Right.
And I've been a bit surprised. On one, and the two examples I gave in my article at the beginning were Puerto Rico and Five Tribes, and Catan also. But there was some discussion about Puerto Rico. And I've been very surprised by how things have evolved from this and the discussion, especially in the US, because, as I said before, when we were discussing, maybe it was before you started recording, I don't remember. I think my point was not really to say we should stop doing this. My point was more, we should try to understand why we are doing this. We should try to understand why we have this image. Because, of course, I think it's first time I played Catan, I said, okay, we are going there, but where are the natives? First time I played Puerto Rico, it was obvious that, okay, these are slaves, and they even made them brown. Maybe we would not have had this reaction if they were not brown, but it was kind of thing to say, okay, we know we are doing it, but we are not saying it. And so I think I wanted to understand what's behind this, and I think it would be more honest, but mostly more clear about ourselves to say, okay, we have this image and we are playing with this image, and we are not clearly saying it. And so my problem was, I think, mostly with representation. When I think tell me if I'm wrong, but your problem when this consulting of the new edition of Puerto Rico was more about agencies and representation, more about what people are really doing in it.
Yes.
It's fun because, I remember in the few messages we exchanged before this discussion, you quoted, I think, one historian, which was Howard Zinn.
Yes.
And my article is full of quotes by Edward Said. And I think it's really the two two different ways of criticizing this view on history. It's a problem of representation. It's a problem of agency, and so that's why for me, I would have liked to see maybe just the original Puerto Rico, but with a note writing, okay, we know that these are slaves. We know that when we published it, it was difficult to say, etc. I think it would be interesting to read this. Well, but I also think that's what I was saying at the beginning, that in the end, maybe it's also maybe not that important. Or maybe it's more important to discuss the problems than to solve it.
Okay. Very good. You laid it out. So it's like, okay, so this is why conversations like this are so valuable, because we're pretty close, right? And like, it's funny because I remember you mentioned in the article, or in the back and forth, that you were coming from a Marxist perspective. Me too. Me too. We're sharing a lot of same things. And also in the sense of, I think there's a lot of gamers. I mean, a lot of gamers that even, because I read your article. I remember reading it back in the day. Maybe not right when it come out, but like around when I was thinking about this stuff, about the colonialism, the Orientalism, and then a couple of other things that were happening on the table. And still, people don't see it. I think there is a large section of gamers that say, okay, it's just a game. It's just fiction. There's nothing to see, nothing going on here. Everybody calm down. Nobody cancel anything. It's just a game. And so and they'll even say, like, to my face, like, I'm putting it in there. Or like they would say to you, you're putting it in there. Like it's just cardboard and chits. A game can't do that. A game can't evoke colonialism or evoke slavery or anything like that. And so it's like, that's clearly wrong, but a lot of people feel that way. So,
in a way, okay,
no, go ahead.
In a way, it's just a game. It's just a game in that I think it cannot teach, it cannot really affect reality. But it's not just a game because we put in it our vision of the world. So it's more a descriptive part. I think you making politics with board games, it's a bit like making politics with songs. It's nice, it's cute, but it can only be very superficial.
Right. So what I will say.
So it's not completely wrong to say that it's just a game. It's important to say it because it means don't mix games with reality. They have relation. What we are showing in the game is an image of reality, but we must not forget that it's just a game.
Right. And it's a tension. It's hard to hold that. I would say that very hard to hold that, because I think that there are people who fall on both sides, and they fall off the edge on both sides. Like they'll take it either not seriously enough, because it is what you're saying before. Ooh, this is making me feel gross. And it's negating some feelings that people have when playing it. Like, you have the feelings, you're a European designer. It's like, oh, I'm playing colonization round. I don't love this. And let me talk about it. Your reaction is different. Your reaction is, let me talk about it. Your reaction is not, okay, let's cancel it or whatever it is. Where mine would be a little bit closer to that, I guess. Well, we'll talk about that in a bit. And then there's some people who take it way serious. We'll talk about that too. Okay, actually, maybe I want to ask about that. Do you feel like, and this is something I'm gonna be very straightforward here, on purpose, because I've spoken with some Euro designers. I've had Ignacy Trevicek on the show, and a couple of others that I've talked to behind the scenes as a consultant. And the overwhelming sense is that Americans can take games a little bit too seriously. We take game themes a little bit too seriously, especially when it comes to this cultural stuff. Is that something that you're prepared to speak to? Is that something that you're prepared to talk about in terms of the reaction, yes, the difference? Yes.
I would not say that you are. It's not only about games. It's the same with movies, for example.
Okay. Culture. We take culture too seriously.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, it's not that you take culture too seriously. It's that you take uh, fantasy words or things which are not the real world too seriously. I would take another example, which is linked to games. I've seen this recent discussions. I've seen it on Facebook, about racism in Dungeons and Dragons and racism against orcs and dark elves. And okay, but first, the problem with this fantasy universe, I think, is not that there are better races and worse ones. The problem is the way races are described, which is extremely essentialist. Yes. Much more, they are very, very, like biologically different, etc., etc. And this is not addressed. It's racist because some races look better than others. But anyway, I don't think racism against dark elves or orcs is a strong social issue. I even don't know if it's bad. Maybe it's good because it helps us to see how our society works. Maybe it would be bad to completely erase this in this fantasy world because we would not see what's happening in reality. And it's the same in movie. When I see a discussion about political discussion in America these days, sometimes it feels like it's more, parity between men and women and diversity and all that stuff is more important, in spaceship teams and superhero teams, and than it is in governments and board of directors, of which no one talks. And so I sometimes wonder if the American left is not, going into a trap, which is dealing with fantasy instead of dealing with reality.
Interesting.
Okay. And it comes with this idea that if we solve the problems here, it has some influence of the way we think, etc., and it will help us solve the problem in reality. I'm not that sure.
We definitely have a issue. And I'll say this, and I have said this on my show, that changes in culture will result in changes in the real world, right? If we address our fiction, if we address the way we, and I focus on games clearly. So okay, I'm very big on let's get some change in games. And my naive, maybe, I don't know, it's what I can affect. Right. And I want to be able to think that okay, if I am able to change some theme or if I'm able to move things around, then for the positive, right? Because what I'm doing is I'm taking some of this colonial stuff out and I'm giving it to the people, like Howard Zinn style, Marxist style. It's okay, I want the people to rise. So then if I put that, if I put that in my board games, if other people put that in their cultural media, then that has an effect. Right. That now has an effect in the real world. And I think that I'm hearing a skepticism, and that's okay. We can disagree on that. That's fine. I think that we can have a civil disagreement about that. Here's what I'll say. Here's my response to that. So, speaking for the American left, someone so a perspective that I take. So, I think what I'm hearing is the big thing that you want us to be able to discuss. Right. The big thing that you want us to be able to have these media that present difficult things. And the old Puerto Rico presented a difficult thing. And certain movies present difficult things, and these you want to be able to keep them where they are and be able to discuss, right?
Basically, yes.
Basically, I mean, obviously we're oversimplifying, but I want to be able to get a point of disagreement. Yeah. So my point is, if the original Puerto Rico were able to generate a better discussion, then I would have no problem. But I don't think it can. I don't think the conversations that Puerto Rico generates are worthwhile discussions. So I think that's the American left point, where it's like we say, oh, discuss, but the way our media comes to us, the kinds of discussions that come out they don't lead to liberation. They don't lead to progress. They just keep us in this stasis thing that's not good for us. Because I'm Puerto Rican. I'm not hierarchy up. I'm from an island that is still colonized, and that's where so that's another thing. I'll bring that into the conversation now. My country is not liberated. My country is still colonized. Just last week, we had a massive protest, thousands of people in the streets because they privatized our power, and they're jacking the rates, and there's more
I've heard about
blackouts,
this. Yeah.
and there's more blackouts, and there's just, I mean, we have corruption up and down, and so that comes from our colonial heritage. Like, we've always been a colony, and it just keeps on going and going. 1510 is not that different from 2022 in terms of the position of colonial powers. So it's very difficult, to be reminded of that in a game. That's where the difficulty of Puerto Rico came. Not that it would put us in the position of colonizer, but like, we're still colonies, like this didn't stop. So it's a little bit, when it comes to someone like me, especially, it hits a little bit closer to home than a European who doesn't know our history. I mean, you just don't have the life experience. So that's number one. Number two, the slaves can't liberate themselves. It goes back to that agency point. So in fact, the game can't even imagine a situation where the slaves win, or the slaves achieve any kind of victory, because they're so inert, they're so passive, they're just there. So that's not history. I mean, the overseers were very afraid, very cognizant of rebellion and running away, and they're very cognizant of that, and that's why the discipline was so hard. So that's why the laws were the way they were. So a game like Puerto Rico erased all that. It erased too much. In order to have a good conversation, you need good source material, and the source material kind of erased everything. It's like kind of having a conversation off a coloring book. That's not going to make a good conversation. You're just kind of bringing in your own preconceptions. If the Puerto Rico engine were richer, the Puerto Rico engine said more.
Yeah, but it's a Euro game. It's not made to me. Yeah.
Okay. And so I guess that's my point.
And at its heart, it doesn't want to be a game about history.
Right. Yes.
And maybe it could have had another setting. And in a way, this new version changes the setting. So I think, there could be a very, very complex game with all this story about slave and overseers and rebellions, etc., etc., etc. But it would be another game.
Right. It would be more complex. Like, in order to make a good history, you have to make a lot of complexity in there. And Puerto Rico doesn't want to be the original Puerto Rico engine. Does not want to be that. So I just finished the point. I apologize. I want to finish my point. So my point is, if the Puerto Rico engine is going to change, because that's clear. It's a classic game. It's an evergreen game. You don't touch evergreen games.
It's obvious.
You just don't touch them. So then my decision was, okay, it could go one of two directions. It could either put in more mechanisms to have more, of the stuff that happened, the slave rebellions and the oppression and all that kind of stuff, or it could just go a whole different direction and take out those colonialist aspects, one or the other. And so I hear what you're saying. It might have been better discussion point to bring in some of that, highlight some of that other stuff, but I don't think the discussions that we've had this game for 20 years. I haven't had a single good discussion about Puerto Rico. I'm like, it just stays in that whole, the colonialists were inevitable and it's so bad to be a colonialist. I don't care about how bad it was. I don't care about the colonialist feelings. This game can only put me in the mindset of the colonialist, and I don't care about that person. I don't. Not without caring about the colonized. And Puerto Rico cannot make me care about the colonized at all. So that's why I wanted to go in a different direction with it. So I'm guessing you disagree with that, at least in terms of discussion.
No, I see this. I think maybe if there were not this first version, what you are doing in what should have been done. But I probably disagree with you when you say that there has been no interesting discussion. It's not such a big single game. And I think there was one interesting discussion about Puerto Rico, is why did we not say that these are slaves? And I think this discussion was enough to make the game interesting in a way. So I think it's not true that there was no good discussion. There was no good discussion about the game system in itself. It's not made for this. But I think there has been a few interesting discussions about the game setting.
Okay.
About this fact that
We agree to disagree on that. But let's go to that colonist piece, because that was one of the things that got me, we called the slaves colonists. And it's funny we began the discussion on Raptor, because I feel like it's the exact same reason why Raptor called their human scientists and not hunters. Is that fair?
Yeah. You're okay. If it were only for me, I think it would be better to call the scientist hunters in Raptor. With maybe one difference with Puerto Rico, which is that I think Raptor is sometimes played by kids, which is probably not the case of Puerto Rico, which is definitely an adult game. So, but yeah, in a way, it's the same with a small difference that Puerto Rico is not a small difference, is a real historical setting.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes things a bit different. But I think it's the story about Puerto Rico and Catan, which made that when we made a new edition of Mission Red Planet. I don't know if you've played this game.
Mm-hmm.
And when we made a new edition of Mission Red Planet, I added, just for fun, a card which is native resistance. So there are natives on Mars. It's just one little card. It's as a kind of joke. But for me, it was a way to say, okay, there should be something. There should be this kind of fun in every game about this kind of setting. We won't change the game, and it's not an historical setting either. But, it was this kind of small things. But yes, you're right that what was done with Raptor is not very different. You're right.
Yeah. I mean, it's for sales. And it's for sales, and it's for people's comfort. I think it was.
I'm not sure. You've discussed it probably with the publisher, so you know it better than me.
I can neither confirm nor deny my conversation with the publisher.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that with Puerto Rico it was for sales. Maybe it was just like they didn't really realize it. I don't know.
I think, okay, so they didn't change the word until 2020. Like 2020, they just was the first time they really acknowledged that these were, slaves, and this is a slave game, basically. Because in the 2020 version, they put in the blurb. Before then, they didn't have it. So we had whatever it was, 18, 19 years of discussion to, there wasn't a secret at that point. So they hadn't changed, they hadn't addressed it until then. So I don't know. Okay, so maybe okay, and this is something about European history, right? I mean, and this is something that maybe you can comment on this. I mean, Puerto Rico is not the only game. Like, the Euro designers since the 90s have kind of reached around the world and made games about it. We have Istanbul, we have Quest for El Dorado and Bora Bora, and there's so many games from the Euros. I think that's fair to say, Eurocentric perspective, and they kind of all do the same thing. Like, they kind of all erase native stuff, and they file down the labor. Like, they all kind of make colonization kind of a happy thing. It's not just Puerto Rico, right?
I think maybe in the way you talked about Istanbul. I think Istanbul, the problem is not colonialism. It's not colonialism. It's just this kind of Orientalist caricature.
So I associate those two things. Let's talk. Can you please define for the people what Orientalism is? I'd love for you to define it for people.
Okay. I'd say Orientalism is the way the West, mostly in the, let's say mostly in the 19th century, built a kind of fantasy vision of the Orient. And fantasy vision, which can be, a bit different, but which it was a fantasy, not only the Orient, also of Africa and Middle East, and and Japan and China. And it was not there is a sentence I really love. It's Oscar Wilde, who says that maybe the rule of Japan is just an invention. Maybe just something we invented. And in a way, we invented an East and the South, which are have some relations with reality,
Mhm.
something, some buildings and some kind of, but with all of an iconography and an imagination stuff, and which has been pasted upon it. And well, that's Orientalism. That's this way we didn't really try to understand. We just built kind of fantasy image.
So there's a little piece missing. I'll fill it in. It wasn't just to build it in our image; it was to commodify it and sell it. Like it's ultimately
also
a Marxist critique. So like, we commodified so we took this
and
land with all these tribes and all this history, we made it Japan. We picked a couple things like pagodas and samurais and all, the stuff we don't associate with it, so that we could sell it, right? And so that we could sell to our own markets. Is that fair?
But we are not only doing this. Japan is doing this with the West now in a very efficient way.
Right. Yeah. Germans love our westerns.
The vision of Germany in Japanese animes is extremely interesting. They are doing exactly the same we did with them.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I love looking at this.
This is not unique to the West, right? There's not we all do it because we're humans.
But we made it first, and we made it more. That's certain.
And it's done. Okay, so this is where we're definitely gonna disagree on this, but I'll put it from perspective. I think the Western Orientalism has done more damage. So it's done some things in terms of accessing, but I also think it's done damage.
Yeah.
Because
see the British in India. When you see the social structure in India now, is part of traditional India, is part of fantasy India brought back by the British.
Right.
The caste system was not so strong before the British came, but they decided it was the heart of India, and in a way they made it so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is not a podcast about India. I could talk your head off about that too. But I mean, the idea being that so Orientalism is a process of erasure and re-representation. So that's really what it is. Like, we can't, present to the peoples all of Egypt or all of Japan or all the Middle East or all the Caribbean or whatever. It's too big. So it has to be made comprehensible. So it's like, we have to erase some things. So then I think where I want to have a critique is what got erased.
And in a way now, this, tourism around the world, mostly from Westerners, is just this consequence of Orientalism. It's just the end of this.
Right. Yeah. Because it's starting to come back. We had all the colonial
we are going to see, but we are going to see what we want to see. And so they did what we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
When I wrote my book about unicorns, there was this fantastic sentence by David Livingstone, British explorer, saying that, so it was in the 19th century, in Africa, they know that Westerners are looking for goats, tailed men, and unicorns. So when you come there, they just tell you that there are goats, tailed men, and unicorns. So in a way, the fantasy Africa becomes a real Africa.
Right. And so I'm going to touch briefly on the political stuff, and I'll probably kind of give a warning about that. But when I talk about the fantasy becoming reality, so we had a president who was Donald Trump, and he would at one point he was talking about the Caribbean. He was talking about our place or and even Africa, and he called them quote unquote shithole countries. Why did he do that? Are they really shithole countries? You visit those countries, there's good and there's bad, like any other country, and there is poverty. But I feel like that part of what he was operating on were these fantasized notions of poor countries. Africa is poor. That's it. And that's a very kind of essentialized vision of Africa. And so in that person's mind, then they made that conclusion. This is a asshole country. So that'd be no problem if it was just like a person. If it was just like, person like I was at a table with, like, okay, that person has an opinion, whatever. That's the leader of the free world for a period. There was policies that were enacted to maintain power structures. So when Americans look at culture, we're looking at that. We're looking at how cultural messages eventually get into the minds of people in power and how those people in power implement their visions. That's that. In order to try to help you understand what we're looking at, that's what we're looking at.
Yeah. I'm not sure I got your point.
Okay, so I mean, we're talking about cultural messages in board games, and there's Orientalism and colonialism and a lot of difficult stuff.
Yeah,
but
it's like I don't see what Donald Trump's remarks have to do with this.
That countries like that are poor. We can't help ourselves. Matter of fact, that's another thing that he said. Like, because someone actually mentioned about Puerto Rico to him, and he says, "Well, they need to help themselves." As if we're not trying, as if we're, it's like,
of course,
and so so now I'm playing a board game where like the natives aren't helping themselves. The natives are just like doing the work of the colonizer. So like, okay, am I making too strong a link? Obviously, I'm skipping some steps, but I think the general point is that there's a lot of culture because of Orientalism, colonialism, all these things that put out the message that like countries like Africa, the Caribbean, other places that are historically poor can't help ourselves. We can't do anything. So when a powerful person gets that idea, they reproduce oppressions.
Yeah.
That's kind of the links that we're seeing here in the American left. And we see it because, and I can't speak for the people who are privileged and they take on left. I can't speak for that. I can only speak for myself, who, grew up with a family in Puerto Rico. We face a lot of that stereotype from powerful people, and we wonder where those stereotypes come from, and we're trying to like kind of change the quality of the water, so to speak, in order to try to get different ideas out there. That's what we're trying to do. I mean, do you understand that point?
Yeah, I completely agree with this.
Oh, yeah, I figured you would. So here's where we differ. For me, this is why Puerto Rico had to change. Because I just feel like the old Puerto Rico, no matter what discussions would have, it keeps on leaking stuff into the water, so to speak, leaking stuff into our cultural water. And when a powerful person picks it up, that's where we get problems. So it's like, is Puerto Rico the problem? No, we're a small hobby. There's no whatever. It's just like, this is what I can affect. And this is, people are still thinking about it. There's plenty of Puerto Ricans. There's plenty of different people who play. And it's like, if I can get a more positive message in the water, maybe something will happen.
And anyway, no matter what is done with Puerto Rico, the fact that something has been done and that it generates more discussion is always a good thing.
Thank you. It is definitely generating more discussion. Okay. So, I mean, in terms of like the way that Europeans and Americans see each other, the way we get along, is this a fair question to ask? I mean, is there a sense among like either European peoples or European like designers that it's becoming harder and harder to kind of design, to kind of know what's acceptable? Is it different than it was 5-10 years ago? Okay.
Yes, certainly. And it's not only different, I'd say for sometimes it's mysterious. We have troubles understanding what will be acceptable or not with American. We used to have this with Japan, for example. We still have it, but not so much. And we have it more and more with the US. So obviously, and here I come back with what I was saying at the beginning, I think it's probably deciding that there are things we should not discuss. There are fantasy worlds which should change, etc., etc. For me, I think it's probably picking the wrong enemy. I think the right enemy is in reality and probably not there. I even think that it's good to have, fascist movie, fascist books, and things with which you disagree. They should be there, and you should deal with them and speak what you think about them. And so I have, but yes, obviously, the first game I published was in 1984. It was called Baston, and it was bar brawl in France, with rockers and fighting with knives and broken beer bottles and that kind of stuff. And no one took it seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And if it were published now, I think no one would take it seriously, but everyone would feel obliged, bound to say that it's not acceptable. Even when everyone will deep inside understand that, okay, they're not taking it seriously. They're not saying that we should kill everyone in the cafe. But it's obvious that this game, it's not possible to publish such a game today. Certainly not.
And is that a loss? Is that a loss? Is that
I think yes. I think it's a loss. I think it's a loss. And I think there's also the problem, and maybe this is maybe this is something. This is, I don't believe that much in cultural differences. I think we always tend to exaggerate them.
Right.
But there are a few ones, nevertheless. And I think there is this idea in the American culture that when you make a joke about something, it means that it's something you dislike or you despise. When in the French tradition, it's almost the opposite. We have a proverb that says that the good jokes are about things you love. And so there are things it's
interesting. Oh my God,
becoming,
that's so interesting.
It's very strange for me. I say, you cannot joke about this. But why? Why should I not joke about it? And it's obvious when making stuff for the American market that there are things where, okay, jokes are not acceptable, because if you make a joke about this, it's like you are criticizing it. But not. If there is no objective critic in it, it's just a joke.
So I'll shift the example a little bit just to kind of play the point. So let's say, do you frequent like Facebook, and do you get memes often sometimes? Okay, you enjoy a good meme like anybody else. So we have a meme in board gaming where one meme where the guy is looking, he's buying games, and then he's constantly looking over his shoulder. Oh, what will my wife think? Oh my, I better hide this because my wife is not going to be happy.
I've seen it on Facebook. Yes,
there's many iterations of that meme, but the idea being like there's a guy who just like can't help himself. He wants to make the wall look like me. All these games on it, and they are constantly buying stuff and looking over their shoulder to the wife. And so the stereotype being that the wife, the wife is going to be, prudish. They're not a gamer. Women aren't gamers. They're not going to understand. They're going to bother me. They're going to do this. They're going to do that. So then it's, on the one hand, it's a cute meme, right? On the other hand, the culture struggles with stereotypes about women gamers, that women are not gamers. So then what happens is,
when you see it, you understand that it's about stereotypes.
Right. Well, actually, it's not. I mean, okay, so I'm very fascinated by that because not everybody receives that meme that way. Some people receive the meme, they see the stereotype and they laugh about it. Some people, they see the meme, but they don't understand that it is a stereotype. They think that that's how women are. And there are many, many people in our hobby that still think that women don't game. Gary Gygax thought that. Gary Gygax thought
Yeah.
that women were incapable of playing an RPG, because I don't know what he thought, but like he thought that men are able to get into that imaginative headspace and we can calculate stats and we can do all that. Right. And he was
and actually statistically women still play less than men, but it's going.
but why
I've seen stats recently.
but why is
It's
that?
changing.
That's what we're so is it changing naturally, or is it changing because folks like us spoke up against the stereotypes that were stopping women from coming? That's what we're asking.
I think it's neither one nor the other. I think it's just because, as a general rule, differences in cultural activities between men and women are slowly receding. And I think it's happening in board games, like in literature, like in music, like in everything. Women are going into board games and more boys are reading books. It's
I think okay, so speaking to, I have a lot of women friends in the hobby, they would say that it's changing because women are making it change. It's changing because women are speaking up about exclusionary things like these memes or these images and like and there's pushback. And there's pushback that people that say, oh, it's just a game, leave it alone. Oh, it's just a joke, leave it alone. And the woman's like, no, it's not just a joke. It is a thing that is helping to stop me from enjoying this hobby because it's perpetuating a stereotype. So I think that's where we are in terms of the culture war fight. Is it serious? Is it not serious? Is it not serious? People think it's more serious, people think it's less serious.
But you cannot decide that you always act as if everybody is taking things seriously. If you act, I would say this as a teacher, if I act as if, or sometimes I may have a few stupid students, I didn't have that many, but if you act as if everybody is stupid, everybody will end stupid. I have to act as if my students were able to understand everything I am saying. I know that sometimes there are a few things they want to understand, and maybe they will ask their neighbor. And there are a few ones who understand more and less, but I cannot align with the ones who understand the fewest. Or everybody will be stupid at the end of the year.
I agree with you. I agree with you in the sense that let's go back to the example of the meme. My approach is to talk about the meme. I'll fire up a video. I'll discuss what the meme is actually saying, and I'll invite the comments. And you've written in some of my comments, you know how it goes. Like I try to accommodate alternative perspectives as much as possible, right? And I hope that through the discussion, people can realize, oh yeah, that I can see how that meme. I can see how you're seeing that meme. Let me, and so the discussion is valuable to kind of get movement. So that's my thing, and I do think that our folks on our side can get a little bit scoldy about, well, you have to see it this way, right? I agree with, and I try to model something. Not that I don't want change. I want change. I want more women and more diversity, but it's just my way about it is through persuasion and through discussion, not necessarily getting scoldy. So like I think what you're saying is you agree with that, and you're kind of looking at, okay, let's work on the scoldy. We don't need too much of that. Okay.
Yeah, I agree with this.
We're on this. We're this is what I find with these cross-cultural, cross-Atlantic. My friend here is in Lyon, France, and I'm Hartford, Connecticut. So, I find with these cross-Atlantic conversations, when you really talk, we like people of goodwill agree on most things. People are most things, and this is a difference of emphasis. I think that you find more value in just looking at culture the way it is, and I find more value in finding points where the culture is getting into the water and like changing those parts. So, but for the most part, I think we're on the same page of like, okay, we want people to discuss, we want people to change.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. And we can talk about whether the changes that are happening in the hobby are, which changes are good and which changes are difficult. So, I mean, I think that we're still working that out. Okay. So you've given me an hour of your time. I really appreciate that you've given me so much time. Is there anything else in this conversation that you would like to address? This has been wonderful so far, but if there's anything else you have in mind, I would love to discuss.
I don't think out of my mind just now, there's nothing I'm thinking of. Maybe we have another one another day, and
At some point.
we go another direction.
My European brothers and sisters are always welcome on the show. I value these conversations because I value people who are of good faith, who don't think the way I do. You know, it was valuable to me, and especially, you know, that the French approach to humor, right? You make fun of the things that you love. Where Americans, you know, our humor tends to be a little bit more militaristic. We're going after people. Little things like that just fascinate me to no end. Okay, so you know, you said before that you are, you know, messing around with some designs. Is that the future for you?
I don't, you know, I will retire as a teacher in a year and a half, I think. But I'm becoming quite old. But I also noticed that, also probably because I'm becoming old, I have troubles getting really new ideas for game. I think it's more and more kind of re-implementation of ideas I had before. I try to keep informed. I try to see what's happening, but it's becoming difficult. Maybe it will deal more with books. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know. I had a great pleasure writing my big book on unicorns. I'm thinking of a second one, maybe. I don't know. But I will see. And you want to jump into board game full time someday or not?
I am working on well, I'll put it in a very general way, because you know about NDAs and everything. I have been signed to do a co-design for a board game.
Okay.
So the ink has been dried. I am working on a full-time blown out game right now. I'm very excited about it. I just did a design session yesterday, and we had, you know how early game design looks. It looks like index cards and cardboard and magic marker and all that. So we're there, and this is happening.
Historical setting.
Yes.
It's a historical setting, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, yeah. And I'm also a consultant. So like I've actually worked with and that's been going on since last year, because I did the Puerto Rico thing. But that's not the only one. There's many games that are going to have my consulting. So you led right into it. Thank you very much for leading into it. I'm a cultural consultant. Please visit my website, shelfstoriesgbl.com. If you want to help with your historical game or your fantasy theme, anything that touches upon real world, you know, representation, stereotypes, or etc., I can help you guide through. And so this is something that Europeans have. This is a service that I provide, because a lot of Europeans, they don't quite know what will hit in the American scene. I can help with that. I can look at your game. I can say, okay, this is the rough part. And so, because I want people to sell games. I want more games. I want more themes, you know, so, and I want to, you know, and it comes out of a place of, you know, these cross-cultural conversations are hard, and this is a new world, changing world. So I want to partner with my European brothers and sisters who are selling games. I will help. I want to, you know, help games be a little bit more accessible to everybody. So you led me right into it, and then we'll see about the actual design stuff. We'll see how this design goes. So
okay.
Absolutely. I look forward to your thoughts. If you actually get it to the table, look forward to your thoughts sometime in a year and a half, somewhere on there.
Perfect. I will try.
Absolutely. Bruno Faidutti, you have been very, very gracious with your time and your thoughts. This has been a very wonderful conversation across divides. We need more of this.
Thanks, Jason. And another time.
Thank you very much. If you could change your mind, you can change the world, people. So until next time, later, everybody.